program is brought to you by Agnes Scott College. For more information about Agnes Scott College, please visit our website at agnesscott.edu.
We are delighted to see you all this evening. Thank you for coming out. My name is Bill Starr. I'm the Executive Director of the Georgia Center for the Book, which is based at the DeKalb County Public Library right here in Decatur. We are the proud sponsors of tonight's program. We are delighted to have been able to bring Gwen Ifill to you. We are equally delighted that our wonderful partners and friends at Agnes Scott College have so generously agreed to host her. There is certainly no finer place for that than Agnes Scott, and we thank you. Sure, yes. This is one of about 120 different author programs that the Georgia Center for the Book is presenting throughout this year. And I want to tell you some good news that we just found out this afternoon. The Pulitzer Prizes were announced this afternoon, and two of the authors who won major Pulitzer Prizes were presented by us, the Georgia Center for the Book, in Decatur, at the Decatur Library in the last year, reading from their books which won the Pulitzer Prizes. One is Slavery by Another Name, written by Douglas Blackman. Many of you know that Doug Blackman is the Wall Street Journal's Atlanta chief correspondent and is based here, and this is a great honor for Atlanta, I think. He won the General Nonfiction Pulitzer Prize, and the Pulitzer Prize for History went to the author of The Hemmingses of Monticello, Dr. Annette Gordon Reed. We take just a bit of pleasure and pride in knowing that those authors, we were able to bring them here for readings. I hope some of you in this crowd got to hear them. They both did remarkable programs, and we hope at some point actually to have both of them come back. There are a couple of people I'd like to recognize here this evening before the program continues. We have wonderful government support in DeKalb County, and one of the members of the DeKalb County Commission, Commissioner Connie Stokes, is here. And would you mind standing and be recognized, please? And I would be remiss if I did not tell you that the man who is responsible for the Georgia Center for the Book, the man who had the vision for it, which has worked well, and the man who brought it to DeKalb County, the man whose mission it was to turn it into a statewide organization, is here tonight, and he is the director of the DeKalb County Public Library System. Would you please welcome Darrell Wiley. Darrell? It's my very great pleasure now to introduce to you the distinguished president of Agnes Scott College, now in her third year, and a wonderful friend, and as I said, a wonderful partner for the Georgia Center for the Book always. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Elizabeth Quiche.
Good evening, and welcome to Agnes Scott College. Here at Agnes Scott, we're proud of our over 100-year heritage of educating strong and feisty women who broke through barriers to excel as leaders, scholars, artists, and catalysts and advocates for change. And as members of the Atlanta community, we're proud that our city has been home to multiple generations of visionary breakthrough leaders in our country's long and difficult journey toward racial justice. So we're particularly delighted and honored to partner with the Georgia Center for the Book to welcome Gwen Ifill, a women's college graduate, a pioneering African-American broadcast journalist whose strength, nuanced intelligence, deep knowledge and love of American politics, and warm presence and winning personality have made her one of the most respected figures in television journalism today. Gwen Ifill is moderator and managing editor of the PBS program Washington Week and senior correspondent for the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer. Now in its 40th year, Washington Week is the longest-running primetime news and public affairs program on television. Prior to joining PBS, she was chief congressional and political correspondent for NBC News, White House correspondent for the New York Times, and a local and national political reporter for the Washington Post. She's covered 6 presidential campaigns and served as a moderator for vice presidential debates during 2 of them, 2004 and 2008. And she's even been played by Queen Latifah. A graduate of our sister women's college, Simmons College in Boston, Ifill has received more than a dozen honorary degrees and many, many honors for her work. Her new best-selling book, The Breakthrough: Politics and Race in the Age of Obama, is a perceptive analysis, not just of the election of Barack Obama as America's first black president, but of the cultural and political sea change that a new generation of African-American political leaders are creating all across America. So please join me in welcoming Gwen Ifill.
Scratchy tonight, Washington allergies, which I'm sure you have none of down here. Yeah, I've heard about you. I think it's worse because I'm in Atlanta, so it's all your fault. I'm very happy to be here. As I was standing backstage listening to the introductions, I thought of 2 things. One is that I could have sent Queen Latifah here in my place tonight. And none of you would have noticed. Come on, admit it. And the second part is I was listening to the Pulitzer Prize announcements because I realized I didn't know the details of who had won what, and I kept whistling my name. Somehow, I guess I didn't make it in time for qualifying. So, next year, next time. I am very happy to be here, and especially since I wasn't able to be here when I was supposed to be here a couple of months ago, and I know many of you were all prepared to be here that night, so I thank you for coming back. I'm very pleased to be in Atlanta because it's warm here, because spring is in full swing, and we still haven't quite decided about these things in Washington, and because I also get a chance to talk about something which is near and dear to my heart, which is the obsession I have had for the last couple of years, but it turns out also my entire career, with the topic of this book. It's been an interesting ride. I have to say that when I started out in journalism, I just wanted to be a writer. I just wanted to be someone who went and sat on the front row and forced people to answer my questions. 30 years later, at a vice presidential debate, I discovered no one answers your questions. So I had to take other things from my experience. And one of the things I took from my experience, completely, I guess, by serendipity and not anything I had planned, is that I ended up accidentally covering an amazing time in American life and politics. And that's a time when race and politics became a big deal. And when Doubleday approached me to write a book, they wanted me to write a book about Barack Obama. And I, with amazing prescience, for which I'm well known, said, he's not going to win. But what I did, part of it is because I honestly didn't think. And the other part of it is I also thought I had a better idea. That Barack Obama was not the only person of his generation who was doing this. That if I dug hard enough and I asked enough questions, I was going to be able to come up with a whole lot of Barack Obamas who were like him and unlike him, who were the ones who reaped the benefits of the civil rights movement that their parents fought. That when their parents were marching and sitting in at lunch counters, they were raising children who didn't know what lunch counters were, and whose lives as a result were shaped more by access than by denial. As a result, we now have this remarkable moment in history, the one I didn't foresee, but one also in which there are Barack Obamas in the White House, and there are Shirley Franklins in the mayor's offices in Columbus, and in Atlanta, and in Cincinnati, and in Philadelphia, and in Iowa City. Who knew there was a black mayor in Iowa City, Iowa? And as the more I dug, and the deeper I dug, the more I realized not only was this broad, deep, and interesting range of people who had come of age not post-civil rights so much. Joe Lowry almost took off my head when I tried to use that term. But after the civil rights, the first blush of the civil rights movement had faded. Here were the people who walked through the door and benefited from it. And lo and behold, they wanted to pursue public service. They wanted to find ways to make the world around them better. This was interesting to me because I'm one of those sick souls who love politics and love politicians. And I had been covering them all my life, and I had been encountering ways in which they kind of bumped up against each other. And I want to read to you, by way of describing what I finally settled on, and how I settled on the term breakthrough even, was I want to read to you part of the introduction from the book. I learned how to cover race riots by telephone. They didn't pay me enough at my first newspaper job to venture onto the grounds of South Boston High School when bricks were being thrown. Instead, I would telephone the headmaster in the morning and ask him to relay to me the number of cafeteria chairs that had been broken each day. A white colleague would then be dispatched to fill in the details. I've spent 30 years in journalism since then, chronicling stories just like that. Places where truth and consequences collide, rub up against each other, and shift history's course. And none of that prepared me for 2008 and the rise of Barack Obama. It is true that he accomplished what no black man had before, but it went further than that. Simply as an exercise in efficient politics, Obama 08 rewrote the textbook. His accomplishment was historic and one that transformed how race and politics intersect in our society. He is the leading edge of the change, but his success is merely the ripple in a pond that grows deeper every day. After the election was over, I talked to David Axelrod, who was Obama's chief strategist. I guess I have to call him President Obama. I can't keep calling him Obama, it's disrespectful. I talked to David Axelrod, and I asked him about this, how he had thought through this, and he said to me, when people do something that they've never done before, I think it makes it easier for them to do it a second time. So when people vote for an African-American candidate, I think it makes it easier for the next African-American candidate. The next African-American candidates, and a fair share of those already in office, subscribe to a formula driven as much by demographics as by destiny. When population shifts occur, brought about by fair housing laws, affirmative action, landmark school desegregation rulings, political power is challenged as well. It happened in Boston, New York, Chicago, and every other big city reshaped by an influx of European immigration, and it's happening again now in Miami and Los Angeles and suburban Virginia and North Carolina, where the political calculus is being reshaped by Latino immigrants. With African Americans freighted with the legacy of slavery and the pushback from whites who refuse to feel guilty for the sins of their ancestors, the shift has been more scattered and sporadic, yet no less profound. So I did what journalists do. I set out with a thesis and set out to prove it. And along the way, I found out what journalists find out, which is that your thesis is usually wrong. My thesis was that there was this cream of the crop, this talented 10 that didn't go terribly deep, but were remarkable and worth chronicling. People who had access to Ivy League educations and outsized opportunities, and that if I could just chronicle all of them, I might be able to write a book while working for 2 broadcast shows and covering a momentous election. That was a really odd idea. So I settled on 4 characters. Obviously Barack Obama, except that there's so much being written about Barack Obama, I had to decide to find a different way to write about him. And it presented itself by watching the tightrope he walked all year long, trying to be the first African-American elected president, and to do it without calling so much attention to the fact that he was indeed about to become the first African-American president. It's quite a tightrope. I decided to focus on Deval Patrick, who's the governor of Massachusetts. And as an example of how slippery the story became through the year, when I started writing that he was the only African-American governor of the United States, one day I was writing that sentence, I turned on the television and there was Elliot Spitzer standing at the microphone. And voila, we had 2. And then I decided I wanted to talk to a member of Congress. And I had actually settled on a different member of Congress. And one day in the process of reporting, I had a conversation with Artur Davis, Congressman from Alabama. As I talked to him and I listened to him outline not only the path he had come, but the path he had in mind for himself, it became clear to me this man had decided in 2010 he was going to run for governor of Alabama, which he's a 40-year-old black man. I was stunned at this idea. So I thought to myself, this is the true audacity of hope right here. He is running. Since this book came out, he has announced he's running, and this is a guy who got his House seat by challenging an entrenched black incumbent. Another interesting thing which I didn't anticipate. Cory Booker, the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, came of age in a lily-white suburb that his parents integrated as business executives for IBM. They had to actually get someone to sue, use fair housing laws to get into the town. And as he grew up with his brother in suburban Harrington Park, New Jersey, he had every advantage. He became a stand-up football star. He went to Stanford. He went to Oxford. And then when he came home, did he go to Wall Street, where he could have made money at a time when he could still make money on Wall Street? No, he decided to pursue community service and community organizing and move into Newark, New Jersey, probably one of the most troubled cities in the country. A city he had not grown up in, a city that he had no experience with, except that he knew that he wanted to do something at its root. He was young, he was smart, he was completely alien to people in that city in so many ways because they didn't know who he was. He had not come up through the machine. So he did what so many breakthrough candidates did. He ran against someone who was entrenched, he got beat, and then he tried it again. And he didn't wait until they told him it was his turn. The fourth person, that's all four, isn't it? One, Patrick, okay, that's all four. Yes, and the interesting thing I found out about them is that they were all like this. Frederick Douglass once said that, what did Frederick Douglass say? This has been happening to me a lot lately. Power, something about snatching power. Anyhow, the point is, it's been a long day, but it'll come back to me. Power concedes nothing without a demand. Thank you so much. God bless you. It's been a long day, but it's true. There's a guy who's a 35-year-old head of the NAACP. His name is Benjamin Jones, and he told me a story about going to the March on Washington, one of the anniversary marches in 1993. And he arrived there and he discovered that all the lions of the civil rights movement, the people who had done the marching and done the breakthroughs initially in the 60s to get laws in the books, they were up on the iconic Lincoln Memorial stage where King had spoken, and they were holding forth. Meanwhile, all the youngsters, the people who were just coming of age, were all relegated to what he called the kiddie stage by the Lincoln Memorial, by the Washington Monument. And they were a little bit unhappy about it. So he remembers walking up to Julian Bond at this very event and saying, well, why are we over there? Or something like that, probably a little whiny. To which Bond responded to him, if I have power that you perceive you want, it is your duty to snatch it. Power concedes nothing without a demand. Now, snatching it is exactly what these breakthrough candidates have done, whether they're snatching it to become mayor, snatching it to become a county commissioner, snatching it to become governor, snatching it to become an attorney general, at many different levels throughout the country. And much of it has been happening in ways that have not been chronicled. And so that's what I set out to do with this book. Now, one of the interesting things I discovered along the way is there was a lot of friction. Because power concedes nothing without a demand, what we had along the way were a lot of people who were not really crazy about handing over the power they had just gotten, whether it was through lawsuit, or whether it was through redistricting, or whether it was through any other way. So along the way, there was this friction. There was this friction among people who were in the same family often. There was friction among people who were the older generation, who had come of age at a time when they really had to fight and scrape for everything they got. And one perfect example I chronicle in the book is the story of Andrew Young, Atlanta's own. Andrew Young was a strong supporter of Hillary Clinton. He was a strong supporter of Bill Clinton. And early on in the campaign, one of the things he said about Barack Obama was that Bill Clinton was every bit as black as he was. He said a lot of interesting things. He said one of them, September 5th, 2007. It was broadcast on a local show here in Atlanta that ended up on the web. There was a Sunday school teacher in the audience that night who posed an open-ended question to him. Remember the date, September 2007. This guy asked Andrew Young, what did he think of Barack Obama? And this is what Young replied. I'd like Barack Obama to be president. The audience began to applaud. Then he said, in 2016. The audience was caught up a little short. He continued, and his line of reasoning, coming from a man who had linked arms with Martin Luther King Jr. to march for voting rights when he was younger than Obama, decades younger, was nothing short of amazing. Black men who reach too far, too fast, he said, die early. Maynard Jackson, the first black mayor of Atlanta, would have been alive today, Young said, if he had been older when he ran for mayor. Another former mayor, Bill Campbell, who recently completed a 2-year sentence for, I don't have to tell you, for tax evasion, would not have been sent to jail, he said. Even Martin Luther King Jr., who died at the age of 39, would still be alive today if he had not achieved so much so soon. Young said, Martin's home got bombed the first year. They took all of his money the second year and sued for income tax evasion. He got stabbed the third year. The fourth year, they took him. It's not a matter of being inexperienced, he said of Obama. It's a matter of being young. Young's comments revealed in an unusually candid and naked manner how little he knew about someone he considered a whippersnapper. And when I went to him after the election and asked him why had he said these things and what was motivating him, this is what he said to me. I had a hard time believing the Obama phenomenon. And it was not that I didn't trust him or that I didn't like him. I liked everything about him. It's just that my experience in American politics has been, well, somewhat treacherous. So you had a lot of folks who were thinking about the treachery, including, it should be said, a lot of African Americans, who looked at Barack Obama and thought, I don't know, right up until he won the Iowa caucuses. And once white people said they would vote for him, then they said, okay, maybe this can happen. So there was that. There were so many collisions along the way. And after a while, you had to say to yourself, there is something that is going on here, and it is more generational than it is racial. We are so used in our country to boiling things down to racial conflict. It's why it's been interesting to me as I've traveled talking about this book to hear people willing to have conversations like we'll have tonight about race, but not in a hostile manner. It's almost like we were waiting for an opportunity to talk about race that wasn't about blame or guilt or aggressiveness. People wanted to talk about it in Barack Obama's success, and these other successes, I believe, are giving them a way to talk about it, which I believe to be healthy. Along the way, I've encountered lots of people who've asked me interesting questions. One man wanted to know about, I think 3 or 4 weeks into Obama's presidency, why he hadn't fixed the economy yet. What's interesting, aside from the impatience of that question, what's interesting about that to me is that he prefaced it this way. He said, you know, this was a middle-aged white man, and he said, you know, I marched in the civil rights marches. I was at Freedom Summer, but I want to know why he hasn't fixed the economy yet. Somehow, this man felt that he had to justify to me his racial bona fides before he could criticize the black president. That's not healthy, that we don't feel that he can be criticized because you're a different race. Another person sent me an email and said, why do you keep calling Barack Obama black? Aside from the obvious, I had to point out that I don't call him that maybe they've been hearing that echo in their own heads. But then the person went on to say something even more interesting, which is, well, why can't we just forget he's black? I thought we'd gotten past all that. Why can't we just set it aside? So I thought about that one for a minute, because that was coming from a real place, this question. And what I said to this person was, why do we want to? Why do we want to not talk about something unless we consider it to be a negative? How about this? Let's wake up this morning and think about blackness as something that could be a good thing. Not all of who you are, but definitely part of who you are. When I wake up and I look at my skin in the morning, I don't go, doggone it, I'm black again. I'm pretty happy about it. But there are a whole lot of people who are conditioned to think of race or any conversation about race as something that we should all be on edge about. There was a night in South Carolina that I want to tell you about. It was the night Barack Obama won the South Carolina primary. His supporters could barely contain themselves. Bouncing back from a surprise defeat 2 weeks before in New Hampshire, the double-digit victory thrilled the multiracial crowd gathered in the heart of the South. When their candidate appeared that night, they took up a chant. Race doesn't matter. Race doesn't matter. This chant spread and it built throughout the room. Standing at the foot of the stage in a ballroom just blocks from the state capitol was Obama's pollster, Cordell Belcher, who's African American. I talked to him after the election was over and asked him about that night. This is what he said to me. Here you are in South Carolina, 3 blocks from where the Confederate flag is still flying in front of the state capitol, and all of the history that is held in that state, and you have a group of people, young white people, shouting, race doesn't matter. Now, do they think there is no racism? No. But were they screaming and shouting the world they wanted to exist? Yeah. That is powerful and profound and very different. Now, this may have been the only night during the course of the campaign where anyone believed that race indeed did not matter. Certainly the candidate at the center of the euphoria did not believe it. Obama, like every other elected official in the United States, was keenly aware of how much the nation's mood swings on race could determine the outcome of a competitive election. Sometimes race helped, and sometimes it hurt, but it always mattered. Now here's the way it played out. It was a very interesting year to be writing this book because I was able to look at things in a completely different way. For instance, early in the campaign there was this constant refrain, mostly from African Americans about an African American, which is he black enough? And I thought, what the hell is that? What are they talking about? And so I scratched my head, but I kept hearing it. I kept hearing it in black, the criticism only coming from black people about this black candidate. Now, it should be said among white people, the question was, he seems a little too black to me. But after I began to deconstruct what people meant by this, I realized what they were actually saying was the same thing. Black voters, white voters, green voters, yellow voters, it doesn't matter. They were all saying, is he going to represent me? Is he going to get elected? Is he going to leave me by the side of the road? Is he going to represent only his people? Or when he gets inside, is he going to flip to the other side? People wanted to know, can I trust you? It is a question that every elected official, anyone seeking public office, has to satisfy of any group of voters, which is, I will represent you once I am there. I will not forget your needs. And once you strip the racial coding away from it, that is basically what the question was. But it was much more powerful, I found, for African American candidates, because they felt that no matter what they achieved, they still were going to have to find a way to justify that they meant well by their own people. It was remarkable and it was powerful. Barack Obama chose a path which has been followed even before him by a lot of what I call breakthrough leaders. And when I say breakthrough, I want to be clear. I'm not really talking so much about people who are elected by people who look like them exclusively. People from artfully carved legislative districts who, if the district is 90% black and you're black, you're likely to win. These were people who crossed all kinds of lines, who built coalitions, who won among Latinos and Portuguese, as well as Cory Booker did in Newark, New Jersey, who won like Deval Patrick did in a state that's 7% black. People who were able to push back this idea that you had to create an opportunity for black folks to win because they could win other people over. But throughout, they all heard these same questions. They heard the question about their racial identity, and they heard the question about whether it was their turn. One of the common things about all of these breakthrough candidates is that someone always told them this to step over there, sonny boy, little girl, I'll be right with you. It's not your turn yet. And often these were the people who had made the biggest noise originally. And often the fight happened within families. I talked to many people for this book whose parents had first gotten their elective office or whose children had now succeeded them. I talked to, in South Carolina, a guy who was arrested during the Orangeburg massacre, who worked in both of Jesse Jackson's campaigns, and his 23-year-old son is now a member of the South Carolina State House and has big eyes on the governor's mansion himself someday. But he and his father look at the world in a profoundly different way. Even though on this young state legislator's office wall is a picture of him when he was 4 being held in Jesse Jackson's arms, he sees the world much more differently. He told me when he goes through the back roads of South Carolina, he doesn't see white homes and black homes. He sees homes all with kids who need an education. And so that when you start to, it's kind of a, instead of trickle down, it's kind of a sideways in approach, which is, ideas, even though we know that black folk are the ones who suffer disproportionately from lack of access to health care, I'm not going to say we have to consider health care a civil rights issue. I'm going to say we're going to consider it a human issue, and that if everybody gets fixed health care, that the people who will benefit disproportionately are people of color. The same with education. The same with environmental issues. And that is another thing they all had in common. That's the way you'll notice Barack Obama is talking about governing. He seldom openly invokes race when he's talking about these things. It's the same thing in Buffalo, New York. It's the same thing with every elected official I talk to. They have found a new way to talk about these things in a way that doesn't alienate people or make them feel like you're not on their side. Barack Obama has been very subtle since he's been in the White House. One day I looked up at the Oval Office and noticed that where there used to be a bust of Winston Churchill, was now a bust of Martin Luther King. Now, they hadn't said anything about it. They didn't announce it. It just showed up there one day over his shoulder. And And when Michelle Obama had school children into the White House, a classic First Lady thing to do, you come bring them in, you tell them the history of the White House, she said, oh, and you know it was built by slaves. That's something I couldn't quite imagine Laura Bush saying. Because they were bringing their sensibilities to the office, not forcing it down your throat, not saying something that wasn't true, not creating a history that didn't exist, just stating it as part of the whole history. Now, everybody doesn't agree with this approach. And there are a lot of people, especially in the left, who are very unhappy and would like to see the Obamas of the world, this generation, speak more forcefully in a race-driven way. Among them are Jesse Jackson Sr., who had some complicated issues involving Barack Obama during his campaign. You would never have known that he actually endorsed Barack Obama. And so, at some point during the campaign, I thought one of the things I came across in my career, in addition to covering lots of places, it seemed in retrospect where this tipping point had happened, where all of a sudden African Americans were taking power that had never been theirs before. I covered Jesse Jackson's 1988 campaign, and let me tell you, he's a smart man. Jesse Jackson laid the groundwork for a lot of what Barack Obama did. When you think about the fact that he created the Rainbow Coalition, the idea of the Rainbow Coalition was the kind of coalitions we now see bearing fruit. It wasn't a black organization. But the thing about Jesse Jackson, is that he was not willing to make his arguments seem that broad, or there was something about him which put people off. And when he came out of his neck this summer and started talking about, cutting off people's body parts, people were left the impression that he didn't actually like Barack Obama. So, but now his son is a member of Congress, and he, like so many other of the legatees of the first generation of civil rights leaders, see the world just a little bit differently. I went to talk to Jesse Jackson Jr. in his congressional office one day, and he said to me, there is a movement in the black community toward accountable leadership. The paradigm for the unaccountable leaders has radically shifted. I consider it very respectfully, and this is for the record, my father to be part of the unaccountable leadership, even though I completely believe in and trust his mission and his motives for that which he does. But, he said, the press conference, television visibility, lack of follow-through, everything is a civil rights issue campaign paradigm is profoundly unaccountable to the masses of people and to history, which were remarkable words coming from the man who practically invented the everything is a civil rights issue campaign. Don't get him wrong, his son continued. There is a place for the agitation and protest politics of a Jesse Jackson Sr. and an Al Sharpton, but it is not here, not now. So I had to go and knock on Jesse Sr.'s door. We hadn't seen each other in a while. It was time to pay him a visit. The elder Jackson is keenly aware of his son's apostasy. I encourage in our house vigorous debate, he said. And there is no punishment for a different point of view. We have different roles. Jackson Sr. is the agitator, the younger one is the negotiator. Now, it should be said, I would really like to be invited to Thanksgiving dinner at their house. I think it would be interesting. But this happened time and time again. I talked to Kendrick Meek, a congressman from Florida who's inherited his mother's seat, who's retired. He was supporting Hillary Clinton. She was desperate to support Barack Obama, but didn't want to do so in public because of just this sort of clash. I talked to people whose parents thought that school vouchers and school choice were an evil blight on the earth, and children who believe that it's a necessary way to save urban schools. The world is shifting, even within families. The world is certainly shifting in generations, and it's interesting to watch the way it's happening. Now, a word about women. One of the things as I started this book is I had this idea I would be able to write a fulsome chapter about the breakthrough black women, since my four major characters were men. And so I went on a hunt. I said, I'm going to find these women. I did find them, most of them living in Atlanta. There's something in the water here. But understand, the other interesting thing I found about a lot of women I talked to, and a lot of the experts in women in politics I talked to, is that there weren't as many as you would think. And there were really pretty obvious reasons why. First of all, when you consider the fact that Shirley Franklin was in her 60s before she got elected mayor. And when I asked her why she didn't run before, because she was right-hand person for mayors before, she certainly ran the city, Her answer was, I didn't think I could do it. She had to be recruited to run for mayor. When you consider the fact that Nancy Pelosi was a grandmother before she became Speaker of the House, when you consider the fact that many women make the choice, and we're at a women's college, so I can say this is true because women need to hear this, they make the choice to raise their families first. They prioritize their lives in a way that men don't always have to. And therefore, when they finally have the freedom and the time to follow through on what may be their deepest electoral ambitions, they are older. They are not these 40 and 35-year-olds who I was profiling in this book as breakthrough. They're breaking through, but in a different way. It doesn't mean that women aren't serving and that women aren't succeeding or leading things. They just don't often choose elected politics as often. And one of the reasons why in elected politics, one of the things I said about the breakthrough candidates, they have to be able to not take no for an answer. They have to say, I'm going to break through, and I'm going to do this anyway, thank you for your advice. And they have to find a way to make it clear that they have to ask for money. They have to demand that kind of support. And a lot of women just aren't up for the brief. So I found a lot of women, the Speaker Pro Tem of the Louisiana State House is a black woman. The Speaker of the California Assembly is a black woman. Around the country, I found lots of women who are breaking through. But on the other hand, there is also these limitations, these confinements which are put on them, because they have to answer another set of questions, like, what kind of a mama are you? Okay, paging Sarah Palin, right? These are the questions which are going to be asked of women candidates which are in demand. So that's one reason why they're not where they are. But the other thing is, I think that doesn't mean that we're not getting there. The gender clash, which really played out more than anything else in this election, was the one that Hillary Clinton's presence on competing for the ticket brought out. A lot of white women really felt Barack Obama cut in line. I had a woman say to me, gosh, I was hoping I'd live to dance at the first inauguration ball of a woman president. Now I won't get to. There was sincere sorrow about this, as well as a fair amount of bitterness, which had to play its way out. So one of the things you had to figure out along the way, I think back to when Shirley Chisholm ran for president in 1972. Now she only got 5% of the vote, so I wouldn't quite call that a breakthrough. But the truth is, she also was disdained by members of the Congressional Black Caucus, male members, as being grandiose and hallucinatory for thinking she would run for president. So, that was then, this is now, but we haven't come as far as you would think. And then there's this other thing. I had a talk show radio guy ask me at some point when I was talking about the book, I've got a great question, I bet you've never heard it. So are you woman first or a black first? Oh my God. And I thought, well, I didn't realize I got a choice, but the truth is, black women have always resented being asked to choose allegiance between gender and race. Alice Walker, the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of The Color Purple, chose the pages of the cyber page, theroot.com, to write of her disappointment at the growing conflict, her, quote, deep sadness that many of my feminist white women friends cannot see Obama, that they can believe that millions of Americans, black, white, yellow, red, and brown, choose Obama over Clinton only because he is a man and black feels tragic to me. Imagine, she wrote, if he wins the presidency, we will have not one but 3 black women in the White House. 1 tall, 2 somewhat shorter. None of them carrying the washing in and out of the back door. So here we are at this amazing moment. And I must say, my job, working for the NewsHour, working for PBS, has allowed me to be places where I would not have been. One of the places I was at Barack Obama's nominating convention this summer. And I remember in fact, I'll just read it to you. It's easy to overlook change when it happens, even when it is as dramatic and historic as last year's breakthrough presidential election. But as I stood at Denver's Invesco Field on the night Barack Obama accepted his party's nomination for president, I swear I could feel the rumbling under my feet. The Reverend Jesse Jackson strode through the crowd, remembering how different this night was from the day 24 years before, when he had had his own star term at the Democratic National Convention. His son, Illinois Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr., held court at a purposeful distance from his father. Cory Booker, the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, and Deval Patrick, the governor of Massachusetts, grinned and backslapped and owned the night as the rising stars they are. Artur Davis, the Alabama congressman with designs of the governor's office, sorted through a crowded dance card of public appearances. Benjamin Jealous, newly elected to lead the venerable NAACP, choked up. He was 35 years old. Each in his own way was basking in the political glow of the night. They were not interlopers or token black invitees at this particular party. They did not necessarily even know each other that well, but they were the stars of the evening. For one night, all of their friction and the below-the-radar political positioning each had endured, much of it obscured by Obama's meteoric rise, was on display. It was a rare, lightning-struck moment that finally illuminated the dramatic shift in tone, message, and leadership that has forced a redefinition of black politics and of black politicians. It was the age of Obama in full effect. I'll stop now and take your questions. Thank you. I'm looking forward to your questions. There are microphones in, I guess, both aisles, and I'll take as many as I can before my voice completely gives out. And you, young lady, got to the microphone first, so why don't you start? And by the way, the moderator in me comes out when people start to ask questions that run on too long, so I'm just warning you now. Hi.
Hi, good evening. First of all, I want to say thank you, and that I am an unemployed journalist from Boston, and just happy to be visiting.
There's a lot of those out there.
I did want to ask a question about the black women breaking through. Do you see any black women making a breakthrough in the near future? Do you know of any?
Oh, there are many. But in order to break through, you have to, by my haphazard definition, you have to be breaking through it, I think, more than a level of city council. I think you need to have breaking through, hopefully, in a statewide way. For instance, Kamala Harris, the woman I may have mentioned, who's the district attorney in San Francisco, she's now running for attorney general statewide in California. If she wins, she's a woman in her 40s, never married, by the way, no kids, which is why she's doing this. But she'll tell you this herself, by the way, if she were to win that race, that would be a breakthrough. There is a woman I ran into just last week who told me she's running against Cory Booker for mayor of Newark. Who knows? I don't know whether she's serious or not, but there are women out there who want to run, who want to make history. It's like not soup yet, in the way that probably what isn't soup yet. People have asked me, where are the Latino breakthroughs? Where are the gay breakthroughs? They're out there. 5 years ago, we did not know Barack Obama's name. So anything can be percolating out there I don't know anything about. Thank you. Hi.
Welcome to Atlanta.
Glad to be here.
2 questions. One is, when was the point that you felt you made it? When you were the moderator for the debate, or Queen Latifah played you on Saturday Night Live?
Definitely Queen Latifah.
The second question, which I'm curious to get your perspective on a more serious note, is I would be curious to hear your take. You talk about the change of the paradigm of race and the new generation. But how about the way in which we as a community relate? Theodore White talks in his book, The Making of a Presidency, how television really changed the shift. Mm-hmm. And now with Facebook and instant messaging and email, this campaign, I get a sense that so many people felt connected with this movement that were not connected to politics before. What are your thoughts about that?
Was there a question?
Yeah, the question. What do you think
about the new social networking technology?
What impact did that have to this movement of Barack Obama? Did that really make a difference?
I think it'll make a difference if everybody else can figure out how to harness it. Believe me, a lot of people are working full time trying to figure out, including this White House.
So you don't think Obama learned how to touch them?
Can I finish? I mean, that was a good question. I think he captured lightning in a bottle, and even he doesn't quite know how to harness everything that he did. Howard Dean arguably really started this, but didn't know how to execute, wasn't able to execute it fully. But Barack Obama and his people figured out a way to speak to alienated people who had never felt that politics had anything to do with them. In fact, what he tapped into was something I have been noticing on college campuses for years, which is that people wanted to be involved in the world around them, but they didn't like the idea of politics. And if you could call it social service, you could get young people lined up around the block, but if you called it politics, they'd stay home. He managed to find a way to take politics and redefine it as social service and activism and engagement, and use the web and technology as a way to do that. This has not been lost on the people who are sitting at home thinking, I could have done that, darn. But it was lost on the people who ran against this year. Remember when John McCain famously said he didn't know how to use a computer? And Hillary Clinton announced on the web, remember she did her big announcement on the web, but then never quite did anything with it? But now we have a White House which is trying to figure how to harness its 3 million or 33 million, I don't remember, email addresses and use it as an instrument of political power. And it's not clear yet whether that would actually work, whether it's just going to become an issue where people use it as for a moment or to get excited about an individual, or whether it's actually going to be harnessed around an issue. And so I think it's something that's in progress. Thank you. Hi.
Great respect for you.
Thank you for saving me on that quote. I know it was you.
Yes. My pleasure. When I saw and heard that you were coming, I was looking forward to being here because I was very interested in the title of your book, particularly when they handled you during the debate. But my question today starts with a comment. You know, they talk about a post-racial America, which anybody in a sense knows that's just absolute fallacy. And because I look at how during the campaign, how there was of the 57 million that did not vote for President Obama. You know, of that group, there's some very virulent racists among that group. And I'm looking at what happened last week, the so-called Tea Parties. And listen to a lot of the rhetoric that they blame in everything that happened in this country, of all the debt.
What's your question?
This is, but I said to stop with the comment. But my question is, because this is the question that deals with race and politics. It's all about having our first black president and the polarizing effect it's having on America today. And I'm looking at, my question starts with, when the Attorney General made the statement about America being a nation of cowards when it comes to race, why do you think that was so offensive to so many? And second question is, how do you think the effect of Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and this whole group who are really working in this country to appeal to a certain racist tendency, a certain number of people in this country?
Good questions, both of them. I'll start with the second one. You know, Jesus said the poor will always be with us. I guess the racists will always be with us. I don't believe there's a post-racial society. Barack Obama doesn't believe we're in a post-racial moment. I think that, but the question is, how much of it does it dominate our thinking and our politics? Can we get so obsessed with the fact that there are still people who hate black people or people who hate white people who still exist? Or do we want to also flip this on its head and say, hey, here's an opportunity where there are fewer of those people. Sure, they have platforms and cable television, but they may, or some of them, and some of them aren't really, I wouldn't even say any of the people you named are necessarily racist, but they are showmen and they are trying to whip up viewership. It's up to you to decide how seriously you want to take them and how much you want to invest in that. The thing, what has happened most in I wouldn't even call it my business because it's not journalism precisely, but what has happened so much in television of late is that people have now found that they can go, and on the web, they've gone to, they can go to destinations where they find people who really agree with what they think. And if they don't agree, they just turn the channel and watch. This is a self-contained community of people who only want to hear what they already know. That's not where I work, and it's not the work I do. So I think it's fine if that's the way you want to get your information, but it's not journalism. And I don't actually think it represents the vast majority. There will always be those pockets of people, but you don't want to give them too much power. The first question, which was about the Eric Holder's speech, in which he said that we were a nation of cowards when it came to talking about race, I would really recommend everybody go back and read the entire speech, because people got so hooked up on that word coward that they never got past it. The truth is, he was making a much larger point about where we were as a country. He was making a point not so different from what I was saying when I said that, I wake up in the morning and I don't mind being black. People are not used to hearing anyone say that. Why? Because they get nervous when we talk about race. They feel like we're assaulting them or accusing them of something when we talk about race. And I'm talking about both ways, or all three, or all 85 ways that we have of talking about race in this country. So what I think the Attorney General was saying, far be it for me to do it, what he was saying in a purposefully provocative way was, we need to get over the fact that we live in our separate little isolated bubbles and actually have these conversations. But by using the word coward, whether intended or not, people went back into their bubbles and pulled their coats over their heads, and then we started back from square one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, sir.
Just kind of following something the last gentleman brought up. If you could you talk about the politicization of this book in particular and your thought process going into that debate and some of the racial subtext there, and just kind of how that was used, what you were thinking, did that affect your preparation for the debate?
Good question. You know, what's funny, when this happened, about 2 days, for the three of you in the room who don't know this happened, 2 days before the debate, I had just finished writing every question I had done this 4 years ago, and my process was to read everything that each of the candidates had written, study up on their voting records, try to come up with a set of equivalent questions that I could ask each of them. I didn't want to, and it was even more complicated because one of the candidates didn't have as an extensive a public record as the other. But I still had a responsibility for balancing it out, because the decision making, I think the vice presidential debate is giving people their only chance, because it's the only vice presidential meeting, to decide who should be a heartbeat away. And I wanted to do it as fairly and even-handedly as possible. So I thought I had done it, and I was complete, and I was done with my work for the night, and I walked down the stairs at home, and I slipped and fell and broke my ankle. So the next day I went to the doctor, and he said, "Oh, don't you have someplace to be?" And I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "Well, you'll need surgery, but you can do it when you come back." So he sent me off to St. Louis, all, crutches and wheelchairs. And my major concern during that period, when all of that kerfluffle started about my intent for this debate, was mostly orthopedic. I was mostly concerned about how I was going to get around on crutches. I was gratefully shielded from the worst of what I think was hooey out there about my intentions and my background, but by my friends who said she needs to stay focused on what she's doing here. And I didn't get to see a lot of it, which was good. Because afterward, when I saw how extensive it had been, I was kind of taken aback. The truth of the matter was, I had not finished writing this book at the point. I had not even started the chapter on Obama, because just like a reporter, I kind of wanted to know how it all ended. And so I wanted to withhold all possibilities. Now, the debate commission, I moderated the debate 4 years before, so they knew what they were getting. The candidates who get to sign off and who the moderators are, they get to object if they want, did not object to me. So the fact that, interestingly and suspiciously, 48 hours after the debate, suddenly I was being deemed unfit, and that I was running the secret pro-Obama book was even funnier, because the book had been written about in Time magazine and Vogue, I might add. It had been written about, it was hiding in plain sight. So for someone to suddenly discover that I had a secret agenda was kind of amusing to me. Not that amusing, actually. But I couldn't help but think that part of the reason they were doing it is they were trying to distract me, and they were trying to stir up dust to leave the impression for people who did not know my work, who did not remember that I had done previous debates and wasn't familiar with with our PBS ethic of walking right down the middle, that somehow, because I was black, I was incapable of being fair. And when I suggested that, someone said, "Oh, she's playing the race card." And I realized I was just adding more to the distraction, so I stopped talking about it basically at the time. The truth, the only thing I did end up saying in public at the time was, the proof is in the pudding. So you watch the debate and you decide for yourself whether I was in the pocket of anybody. And the fact that all my critics fell silent the minute the debate was over told me all I needed to know, which wasn't just a distraction. And the fact that when the book came out and they felt even quieter, I knew I had succeeded. Thank you.
Just a little bit. I'd like to know, why you asked the question during the 2004 vice presidential debates, the question that stopped both candidates, the question about AIDS and its effect on black women, and how both of them just...
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. So I'd really like to know why you asked.
I asked, it's interesting. I was searching, as I remember, of a way to ask them. There's a whole kabuki dance that goes around a debate prep. The candidates spend times in their rooms with people dressed up like me and like each other, and they do moot courts, basically pretending what I'm gonna ask. I've had representatives of both campaigns from 2004 and 2008 tell me later, we knew what you were gonna do. We looked at every tape of every question, every interview you've ever given. So my goal was to try to stump them. Was to try to give a question that hadn't been rehearsed, something that hadn't occurred. And my idea was I wanted to ask about AIDS, but I somehow knew that if I asked about AIDS in Africa, something at a far distance, they would have a better answer. But I wanted to ask about something that I had just read about in the paper, which was the shocking and this continuing rise in incidence of AIDS among heterosexual African-American women. And when I asked John Edwards, and I prefaced it by saying, please, this is a question about domestic AIDS, not about China or Africa. He started by talking about Africa. When I asked Dick Cheney, he kind of went, really? Now, what What is interesting to me about their responses, it informed me in lots of ways, and it also informed me in ways that influenced this year's debate, which is because the reaction I got, I had a couple of options when I didn't have the answer to the question. I could have yelled at them, "What, you don't know?" Which would have done what? Put the spotlight on me instead of on them. What I chose to do was to move on, and I got lots and lots of mail-in letters, and as you're demonstrating questions years later from people who say, "I get what happened that night. This was not a priority of theirs. I took that from that answer to the question." People are smart enough to figure these things out for themselves. So fast forward to 2008, and Sarah Palin says, "I'm not going to answer the moderator's questions." Well, I had an option. I could have said, "What?" Or I could take a page out of my book from 2004 and say, people at home will understand that the candidate for vice president on this ticket has decided not to abide by the rules she agreed to, which is to show up and answer questions so the candidates debate. I didn't have to make a point of it. In fact, if I had made a point of it, it would have turned into another kerfuffle about me. But people got clearly, in fact, she tipped her hand a little faster than I think she meant to. And so for the rest of the debate, it was clear that she was being evasive. And I didn't have to say a word. So that's one of the reasons I asked the question, is not because the answers they give, but for the answers they don't give.
I clearly understood.
I'm sorry?
I clearly understood what was going on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes?
Hi. I was just wondering, after so many years of being involved in journalism, do you feel your job description changes over time, or?
Yes. Well, partly because, keep in mind, I spent the bulk of my career, half of my career, working in newspapers, 4 different newspapers in 3 different cities. And all I ever wanted to be was a newspaper reporter. And then when I was persuaded to come into television, I was talked into it kind of on a dare by Tim Russer, God rest his soul. I was appearing on Meet the Press, I was doing little chit-chats on that show, and on Washington Week. And he offered me a chance to come work for NBC full-time as a political correspondent at the top of the game. And I couldn't think of a reason not to do it except for fear of failure. And but he promised he wouldn't let me fail in the best way of all mentors. So I learned a lot from doing things for broadcast differently than writing for print. And then after you got into print, it became clear that was into broadcast, it was clear that was not going to be enough of a skill. And then in fact, if you wanted to go into journalism today as a young person coming out of college, you had to know how to write, how to broadcast, how to cut your own pieces, how to make your own web pages and tweet, which I refuse. I draw the line. But it's just, I'm just thinking, how can you make that much in 140 characters? It's just not that deep. But the truth is, it's changed because our delivery has changed. And because people have gotten more confused about what is news and what is simple information. You know, there are a lot of people out there who put out information. It is not all news, and I'm pretty clear about what that bright line is. Thank you.
President Obama, what do you feel was the most important question you asked him?
What was the most important question
that you asked him?
Did I ask President Obama?
And do you remember how he responded?
Oh, I don't know. I really can't come up with it off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
All right, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I will tell you a good question somebody else asked him at the last press conference. It was a reporter from ABC Radio. Her name is Ann Compton. And Ann stood up, and it looked like it was something out of the top of her head, but I know Ann pretty well, and I don't think it was. She said something in the effect of, Mr. President, now that you've been president for a while, what about race? What do you think about that? And it seemed kind of inartful, and people were like, I can't believe she asked that question. But he gave such a revealing answer. He talked about how interesting it was on Election Day and all the pride there was during inauguration and how that lasted about a day. And then he had to get to work. And I thought that was as revealing an answer about race and about the way Barack Obama deals with race as anything. And that didn't come from a question that anybody would have necessarily said was a great question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi.
On that note, I'm an IT project manager by profession for 18 years. I've been out of work for 15 months, trying to find something to do to fill the time I've started getting back into genealogy, which I've been doing for 12 years. So in response to the tea parties, I'd like to encourage everyone to, on May 9th, come out to the Starbucks on Panola Road and have a coffee chat. What they do is they have a big voice for a small amount of people, and I think that if we show that we have just as big a voice, we can affect the same change and we can make the same grassroots.
You know, I do applaud your initiative, but unless you have a question, there are a lot of other people who do.
I do.
Okay.
Oh, God, I just missed it.
You got it out, now it's just gone.
I just have to say this one, the coffee chat
to go to the next questioner, and you think about what your question is, and I'll come back to you. Yeah, I can tell. So, I'm not an opinion girl, but I will tell you a little bit about Republicans and the African American vote. When I talked to Michael Steele for this book, before he was RNC chairman, obviously, it was interesting because I'd gone to the Republican National Convention this year where only 2% of the delegates were African American. There were 7% 4 years before. When I walked, it was so bad that when I walked on the floor of the convention, people would embrace me thinking I was another delegate. Only to discover I was the evil media. But the truth was, when I talked to Michael Steele about this, his response was that it was embarrassing for his party, that they had done such a poor job of recruiting that they had dropped the ball. The truth is there had been Republican Party leaders like Ken Melman who had put a high priority on the idea of broadening the Republican big tent and making it more diverse. And that ball was dropped in part after the immigration bill failed. They were making a pitch for Latino voters. And also, just because it was a different set of priorities on the political shop of the White House. Now we're at the stage where Michael Steele has become the Republican National Committee chairman, and there are some skeptics who believe that he's supposed to be some sort of counter to Barack Obama. They got a black guy, we got a black guy. I don't think it's that simplistic, because if that were so, it wouldn't have taken him like 6 ballots to get elected, as it did. They were thinking more in terms of having someone who could take the lead and be a spokesman for the party. I don't know that he's going to have the latitude to do that. What has happened in the Republican Party this year, and they're trying to figure their way out. When you hear them, they're trying to find somewhere to stick the loyal opposition banner in the ground. When you say that you hope for the president to fail, I don't think that's working, but 71% of people are hoping for the president to succeed. So they're in a difficult position where they're trying to do what is perfectly reasonable for them to do, which is find a way to say they disagree about the president's approach and his policies. That's perfectly fine in a democracy. And that is possible. It is possible to disagree with the president without it being an initial commentary. So I think that we just have to chill out a little bit and assume that there are going to be disagreements, and sometimes they're going to be inartfully expressed, and sometimes it's going to be unpleasant. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's race-based. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Just wanted to know your thoughts on what an Obama presidency would mean for Africa.
For Africa? Well, I guess we're waiting to see. It's really kind of interesting because you would think, Africa, which is speaking like it's one country, but the continent and many countries in the continent are very anxious to embrace the idea that there's a president who will listen to their concerns. And it's possible. But if I don't miss my guess, Barack Obama will do the same thing with the continent as he does with his own African-American background, which he's not really an African, it's kind of an African and American background, which is that he is going to be much more subtle about it than one would expect. Now, whether people will be impatient with that, I don't know. But it's too soon to say because he hasn't been there yet, he hasn't spoken to yet, and I'm going to just wait and see. I'm going to take 2 more questions on each side because we're about out of time. Well, actually, you know what? I'll take all the questions to the people standing up. And no more people, okay? All right. I'm being really nice here. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I'm very concerned about the fact that 8 million, at least they say 8 million African-American voters did not turn out. People who would have been eligible to vote, and some who were not even registered to vote, did not turn out in last year's election. I think that is a problem for us, and I think it's a problem for President Obama.
Can I just say one thing before I take all these questions? They have to be short.
Okay. Well, I just want to say, I just want to know what can President Obama do, or what would you advise him if you were one of his advisors to get those 8 million African American voters to get out there and to vote? Because if they didn't vote
okay. I don't give advice to presidential candidates or politicians of any kind. I'm sorry. I just don't. I don't have an answer for you. I don't do that. I'm sure you could give him advice, but it's my job just to cover what he says and what he does and provide analysis of that. I don't give advice. Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
I think you answered my question when you said that Obama thought of himself or said something about African and American. And I appreciate that the people who went to vote, and when I taught school, the African American kids talked to the government as they, I talked to them as us. And after I've seen the pride in this election, it's wonderful. And I think many people who are African American are mixed, but it's so clear with Obama that he is black, white, Indonesian, and don't you think that's something we should talk about?
I think Barack Obama calls himself African American. He doesn't identify himself as black, white, Indonesian, or Caponesian. He doesn't say he's biracial. He says, I'm an African American, so we allow people to call themselves what they're called. If you choose to see him in a great rainbow way, that's great. But I'm just saying, I don't think anybody's miffed about it, and I think that he gets to define himself, and certainly in his book, he spent a lot more time thinking about his racial identity than I ever have. And this is the way where he came down, so I still
He had to learn how to do that, and I'm just grateful that he has all that experience, and I think he will.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi, Gwen. I want to start out by saying you are definitely the most beautiful and most intelligent.
No. You think you're going to get to ask a longer question? Thank you, sweetie.
First, the comment that Hillary made during the campaign, the one that did the basement fact, she said that if white women had AIDS at the rate of whites, we'd have found a cure for it by now. When she made the comment, I was surprised it didn't resonate any more than that. That was a very, very true statement, and I was hoping I would hear that from some of the other candidates.
Including Barack Obama.
Including Barack Obama, thank you. And the second one is Howard Dean. I know he started the 50 state strategy that the Dems was so scared to embrace initially. I don't think he really got the credit that he deserved for implementing that program, because all the Democratic bosses. The question was, what do you think that he's been treated fairly since he left the DNC?
You know, it's just politics.
Yeah.
Howard Dean didn't make the right friends, made a couple of wrong enemies, including Rahm Emanuel, who's on the White House Chief of Staff. And you're right, he did create the 50-state strategy. You're right, he did lay the groundwork for a lot of the technology that got Barack Obama elected. But for some reason, they're just not all that tight. And that happens in politics. Yes?
Hi, it's a pleasure to hear you speak. I'm very glad I was able to come tonight. My question is, how do you think, or what do you think the impact of more women in politics on the broader level, as you refer to the breakthrough level, on the national level, will make in our country, how we interact with politics, how politics is done, what I call the nastiness of it.
It can only help, you know? Having gone to women's college, I was brought up I came of age, I suppose, in an environment where I was told that it was okay to do these things. My father was an accidental feminist. He kind of wasn't really so crazy about women's rights, but he forgot to tell his daughters that. So we were allowed to do whatever we wanted, and we were told that we had no limits on our aspirations. And I think that's the same thing which followed through also having gone to a women's college. And I think the reason for that is that women bring a certain temperament to the political process, which is often missing when it's just guys in a room. So yeah, it can only help. Thank you. Hi.
Hi. I just wanted to ask, you mentioned earlier how our racial identities, instead of being colorblind, can be a beneficial thing. So what do you see as sort of an optimum race relationship that we should be moving towards in the future?
Well, you know, an optimum race relationship is that we all get to be what we are and appreciate what it is where we are. We don't have to all be one thing. David Dinkins in New York used to call, instead of a melting pot, New York was a gorgeous mosaic. This idea that we were each individually our own fabulous thing, that we were knitted together and we rose and fell together. But we don't have to be or see the world the same way. A woman, I had a back and forth with a woman at one of these events who just didn't understand why I wouldn't release this notion of racial identity. And I said to her, okay, so imagine for a moment, let's take black and white out of it. Imagine a Korean family immigrates to the United States, and at home they eat Korean food and listen to Korean music, and they go to a Korean church on Sunday, and they speak Korean at home, they speak English in the world. Should they somehow erase their Koreanness in the name of being part of one thing? And for some reason, when you put it in terms of another culture, another national culture, people don't have a problem with that. But when you put it in terms of race, all of a sudden we got all uptight. So I think we ought to find a way to appreciate and understand what it is we are and how we do, how we exist when we exist separately, and how we coexist largely when we do coexist, and be more accepting of it.
Good afternoon. My question is, do you think that Michelle Obama has been held to a higher standard more than the previous first ladies in areas, such as education, beauty, public speaking?
I love that it took this long to get a Michelle Obama question. And not one Bo question, which is really excellent. especially since I don't have an answer to the donor questions. You know, Michelle Obama is an interesting test case. I don't know about it being held to a higher standard is the question. Michelle Obama remembers that a year ago, I'm certain, that a year ago now, she was on the cover of magazines being portrayed as the angry black woman. She was being caricatured as the woman who made fun of her husband because he didn't pick up his socks, and what kind of respect did that show? She was alien to a lot of people. And so now it's funny to watch her being Jackie O-assized. And in the same way that her husband is very subtle and slips in the Martin Luther King bust, she is also being very subtle in that she understands that America accepts, I'm theorizing some of this, but also based on conversations I've had with her in the past, that America has an understanding of what she is, no understanding of what she is, really, other than Claire Huxtable, which is now a 20-year-old model. And that's fiction. But a lot of women get that she's trying to keep a lot of balls in the air. Women get that across all racial lines. Oprah proved that. They get that she is accomplished, but that she is willing to play into the first lady role of being the fashion icon. No problem with that. She obviously doesn't mind that we spend all this time talking about the bow on her blouse in Strasbourg. I personally am quite interested. But I've also heard Michelle Obama give speeches. And she actually gives speeches, which I have to tell you are better than her husband's. And we haven't seen her roll that out yet, because that is yet to come. Because there's a very studied and very careful rollout of the First Lady Michelle Obama brand, which is underway. And so far it's succeeding spectacularly. So I think there's nobody in the White House who's very unhappy right now with how she's being received.
Thank you.
Last question. Better be a good one, no pressure.
So that White House dog. You've talked a lot about breakthroughs in the legislative and executive branches, and I was wondering what you think needs to happen, or what you see happening in the judicial branch.
Oh.
Do you think it's going to be sort of a trickle-down thing?
The judicial branch. I have to say, I'm not equipped or skilled to answer the question about the judicial branch. It's just not something I've studied or done any reporting on. I'm certain there is a huge backlog of people who are about to break through, but I couldn't tell you anything about it. Oh, that's a bad way to end. Does somebody have a better question for me to end on?
So Bo, he's lucky, right? What? Bo, the White House donkey.